Today, I want to talk about something that almost everyone knows, but rarely slows down enough to feel the strange weight of talking to the people we love the most. Family conversations can be soft, but they can also be heavy. They can feel warm, but sometimes they leave us quietly unsettled. And so, as you listen, I invite you to sit with that feeling, not as a problem to solve, but as something human to understand. I remember a morning in my childhood when the light came through the kitchen window in thin, pale stripes. It was early, the kind of early where the house is still breathing slowly, before footsteps rush through hallways and voices fill the air. The kettle was singing gently on the stove, a small, familiar sound that wrapped around the silence. My mother stood at the counter, cutting bread into careful slices, as if each cut required her full attention. I sat at the table, my hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching the steam rise and disappear. She didn't look at me right away. She rarely did in those quiet moments. Instead, she moved slowly, almost thoughtfully, as if the morning itself had a rhythm she was following. I wanted to speak, but I wasn't sure what to say. I felt something sitting inside me, a mixture of comfort and tension, like a word that hasn't found its sentence yet. Finally, she turned and asked very simply, "Did you sleep well?" It was an ordinary question, but in that quiet space, it felt heavier, like she was really asking if I was okay, if I was carrying something, if I needed her to listen. I hesitated. I could have said yes, just as people do automatically. But instead, I said, I kept waking up. My voice sounded smaller than I expected, as if the night had taken something from it. She paused, her knife resting against the bread, and for a moment, the only sound was the kettle. Then she nodded slowly, not in a way that tried to fix me, but in a way that told me she understood. She poured the tea, placed a slice of bread in front of me, and said, "Mornings can feel like that sometimes." In that moment, nothing dramatic happened. There were no big confessions, no emotional speeches, but I felt something shift between us, like a door opening just a little. It wasn't that she solved anything. It was that she met me where I was. As I grew older, I realized that those small conversations were often the hardest ones, not because the words were complicated, but because the feelings underneath them were. Later that same day, I remember sitting in my room, the light softer now, stretching across the floor. My phone buzzed beside me. It was my father calling. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. I loved him, of course, but talking to him always felt careful, like walking across a bridge that might wobble if I moved too quickly. When I answered, he said, "How are you?" in his usual steady voice. I could hear background noise behind him, the faint hum of traffic, the distant sound of people talking. He was at work, always moving, always busy. I said, "I'm fine." The words came easily, too easily. He replied, "That's good." And then there was a brief silence, the kind that stretches just long enough to make you wonder what comes next. I wanted to tell him about my sleepless night, about the strange heaviness in my chest, about the way the morning had felt. But instead, I found myself talking about small things, what I had eaten, what I was planning to do, how the weather looked. We spoke politely, carefully, like two people who cared deeply but didn't quite know how to reach each other. When we hung up, I sat there for a long time, phone still warm in my hand, feeling both close to him and far away at the same time. I wondered why it was so difficult to say what I truly felt to the people I loved the most. Maybe you've had moments like that too, sitting at a table with a parent, wanting to speak but feeling stuck, or holding your phone, knowing someone cares about you, but still feeling alone in your thoughts. Let's slow down here and look at some of the language we've touched. When my mother asked, "Did you sleep well?" It wasn't just a question about sleep. It was an invitation. Repeat after me, slowly. Did you sleep well? Feel how soft that sounds when you say it gently, without rushing. And when I replied, I kept waking up. Notice how simple that is. No complicated grammar, just honesty. Try saying it slowly. I kept waking up. Let the words sit in your mouth. Imagine saying them to someone you trust. Then there is the phrase, "Mornings can feel like that sometimes." This is such a tender sentence. It doesn't judge. It doesn't minimize. It simply acknowledges. Repeat after me. Mornings can feel like that sometimes. Let it sound calm, almost like a reassurance. Now think about the phone call. When my father asked, "How are you?" and I said, "I'm fine." That was a small moment of distance, even though the words were polite. Try saying both, "How are you?" and then, "I'm fine." Notice how they can feel safe, but also a little empty. If you like, take a quiet moment and imagine your own morning with your family. What would you say? How would you answer? You don't need to speak perfectly. Just notice the feelings beneath your words. As I look back on those moments now, I think family conversations are difficult not because we lack language, but because we are afraid of what our language might reveal. We worry about burdening others with our feelings. We worry about being misunderstood. We worry about opening something that cannot be easily closed. Sometimes I feel that in families, love and silence walk very close together. We care deeply, but we don't always know how to express it. And so we speak around our feelings, using safe words instead of true ones. I remember another evening years later, sitting at the same kitchen table, now older, more aware. My mother was again preparing something simple, maybe soup this time, the smell filling the room with warmth. I decided, for the first time, to try something different. Instead of waiting for her to ask, I said, "Can I talk to you about something?" My voice trembled just a little, but I kept going. She turned, surprised but attentive, and said, "Of course," 2 simple words, but they carried so much openness. I told her about feeling overwhelmed, about struggling to communicate with my father, about the quiet distance that sometimes grew between us. As I spoke, I noticed how difficult it was to shape my feelings into English, even though it was my first language. But I also noticed something else the more I spoke. The clearer my thoughts became. She listened without interrupting, her hands resting on the counter, her face soft. When I finished, she didn't offer advice right away. Instead, she said, "Thank you for telling me." That sentence stayed with me for a long time. Repeat after me. Thank you for telling me. Feel how different that is from trying to fix someone. It honors the act of sharing. That evening, our conversation didn't solve everything in our family, but it changed something subtle. It made space where there had been only careful distance before. I think this is where language learning becomes something deeper than grammar or vocabulary. When we talk about our family, our mornings, our sleepless nights, we are not just practicing English. We are practicing awareness. We are learning to name what we feel, to sit with it, and to let others see us. Maybe you've felt this too, that your English sometimes feels like a barrier, Not because you don't know enough words, but because you're not sure how honest you're allowed to be. But English, like any language, can be a bridge if we use it gently. Let's look at another simple phrase that carries so much meaning. When my father asked, "How are you?" I could have said, "I'm feeling a little tired today." Try that now. I'm feeling a little tired today. Notice how it opens a door instead of closing one. Or you could say, "I've been thinking a lot." Repeat that slowly. I've been thinking a lot. These are not complicated sentences, but they are deeply human. As I sit here reflecting, I think about how often we miss opportunities for connection because we rush. We rush through greetings, through questions, through answers. But when we slow down, when we let silence breathe between our words, something meaningful can emerge. Sometimes I feel that family conversations are like fragile glass. We handle them carefully, afraid they might break. But maybe they are more like windows, waiting to be opened so fresh air can come in. Years later, I found myself calling my father again, but this time with a different intention. The room around me was quiet, the evening settling in. When he answered and asked, "How are you?" I took a small breath. Instead of saying, "I'm fine," I said, "I've been feeling a bit lost lately." There was a pause on the line, longer than usual, but not uncomfortable. He didn't immediately speak, and in that silence, I felt my heart steady. Then he said, very simply, "Tell me about it." 3 words that changed the shape of our conversation. Repeat after me. Tell me about it. Let it sound open, inviting, patient. As I spoke, I realized that he had probably been waiting for that kind of honesty all along, just as much as I had been afraid to give it. We didn't fix everything that night, but we listened, and sometimes that is enough. So why do family conversations feel so difficult? Maybe because they touch the most vulnerable parts of us. They remind us of who we were, who we are, and who we are becoming. They carry memories, expectations, love, and sometimes unspoken pain. But they are also opportunities to be seen, to be understood, to practice the kind of English that goes beyond textbooks and exams. As you continue your own journey with English, I invite you to notice these moments in your life. The quiet mornings, the careful phone calls, the small hesitations before you speak. These are not obstacles. They are your material, your stories, your language in motion. You are not just learning English. You are learning how to notice, how to breathe, and how to express your world. And every time you choose a gentle, honest word, you are growing. So the next time someone you love asks, "How are you?" maybe take a moment before you answer. Feel what is truly inside you. And then, in your own way, in your own English, let it out. I sometimes think about another scene that comes back to me when I reflect on family conversations. A quieter one, less obvious, but just as meaningful. It happened years later, in a small apartment I was living in at the time. The room was simple, a couch near the window, a bookshelf filled with well-worn paperbacks, a kettle that clicked softly when it was ready. It was evening, the kind of evening where the sky turns a deep, gentle blue before slipping into night. My sister called. I hadn't spoken to her properly in weeks, not because of any conflict, but because life had simply carried us in different directions. Work, responsibilities, small distractions, they all had a way of pulling us apart without us even noticing. When I answered, her voice sounded familiar and strange at the same time. Like hearing an old melody you haven't listened to in years. She asked, "Are you busy in that careful tone people use when they don't want to disturb you?" I looked around my quiet room, at the stillness of everything, and said, "No, I'm just sitting." A simple answer, but it opened a door. There was a brief pause. Then she said, "I just wanted to hear your voice." The words were soft, almost shy, but they stayed with me. In that moment, I realized that sometimes family conversations don't need a reason. They don't need a problem to solve. They simply need presence. We talked about small things at first: her job, my day, memories from when we were children. But slowly, the conversation deepened, like water gradually becoming clearer. She told me she had been feeling overwhelmed, that she often felt she had to be strong for everyone else. I listened, really listened, in the way I had learned from my mother that morning years ago. At one point, she said, "I don't always know how to say what I feel." I remember how much that sentence resonated with me, how familiar it felt, even in my own language. Repeat after me, slowly. I don't always know how to say what I feel. Let the words move gently. They are honest, and honesty is powerful. I replied, "You don't have to be perfect. Just tell me what comes to you." Try saying that yourself. You don't have to be perfect. And then, just tell me what comes to you. Feel how supportive that sounds. As we spoke, I noticed something important. The difficulty in family conversations is not always about conflict. Sometimes it is simply about vulnerability, the risk of being seen, the fear of being misunderstood, the uncertainty of how our words will land. I think back to that call often, especially when I work with students who feel nervous about speaking English with their families or loved ones. They worry about making mistakes, about sounding strange, about not being clear enough. But in truth, the courage is not in speaking perfectly. It is in speaking honestly. Maybe you've felt that too, sitting with your phone in your hand, wanting to call someone but hesitating, wondering what you would even say. That hesitation is not a failure. It is a sign that the relationship matters. Let's reflect on a few more simple phrases that carry emotional weight. When my sister said, "I just wanted to hear your voice," that is such a tender expression of connection. Try repeating it. "I just wanted to hear your voice." Say it softly, like a whisper. Or when someone asks, "Are you busy?" you could answer, "Not really. I have time." Repeat after me. "Not really. I have time." Notice how welcoming that sounds. Language, in these moments, becomes less about correctness and more about warmth. It becomes a way of reaching across distance, of saying, "I am here with you." As I sit here thinking about all of this, I realize that family conversations are difficult because they mirror our inner world. They bring up our fears, our hopes, our need for love and understanding. But they also offer us something beautiful, the chance to grow together. Sometimes I feel that every difficult conversation with family is like walking through a fog. At first, everything feels unclear, uncomfortable, even a little frightening. But if you keep moving, slowly and patiently, shapes begin to appear, paths become visible, and eventually you find your way through. I remember one last scene that feels important. It was late at night, long after that call with my sister. I was sitting alone, the room dark except for the soft glow of a lamp. I found myself thinking about my father again, about all the things I still hadn't said. Instead of calling him Immediately, I picked up a notebook and began to write. Not in perfect sentences, just fragments, feelings, memories, questions. As I wrote, I noticed how English flowed differently on the page, how it allowed me to explore my thoughts without interruption. One line I wrote stayed with me: I love you, but I don't always know how to show it. Try saying that slowly. I love you, but I don't always know how to show it. Let it land. The next day, when I did speak to him, I didn't read from my notes, but the act of writing had prepared me, had softened me, had helped me find my voice. Maybe that is something you can try too. Not just speaking, but thinking, writing, noticing. Your English grows not only in conversations, but in quiet moments of reflection. As you continue listening, I want you to imagine your own family, the kitchen table, the phone calls, the small silences. Imagine yourself speaking with a little more gentleness, a little more honesty, a little more patience. You are not just practicing a language. You are practicing connection. And every word you choose, every breath you take before you speak, is part of that practice. So when family conversations feel difficult, and they will, because they are human, remember that difficulty is not the enemy of connection. It is often the doorway to it. Maybe next time, instead of asking, "How are you?" in a rushed way, you will say it slowly. Maybe you will listen a little longer. Maybe you will risk saying, "I've been feeling quiet lately," or "I missed talking to you." These small shifts matter. They change the texture of your relationships. They change the way you experience English. They change the way you experience yourself. And as you keep walking this path, learning, speaking, noticing, I hope you remember that your voice, in English or any language, is enough. It does not need to be perfect to be meaningful. It only needs to be real. There are still other moments that drift back to me when I think about this theme. Moments that seemed ordinary at the time, but later revealed their quiet significance. I remember an afternoon in a small cafe near my apartment, the kind of place with worn wooden tables, soft music in the background, and the gentle clinking of cups. I was meeting my cousin, someone I had known my whole life, yet in many ways still didn't fully understand. He arrived a little late, slightly out of breath, apologizing with a quick smile. We ordered coffee and sat facing each other, both of us adjusting in our seats, as if the conversation itself needed time to settle. At first, we spoke lightly: work, plans, old memories from family gatherings, but beneath those words, I sensed a familiar hesitation, the same careful distance that often appears in family conversations. At one point, he looked out the window, then back at me, and said, "Sometimes I feel like I don't really know anyone in our family, even though I've grown up with all of you." His voice wasn't dramatic, just thoughtful, almost tired. I felt that sentence deeply. I didn't rush to comfort him. Instead, I let his words rest in the air between us. Then I said, slowly, "I think I understand what you mean. Try saying that yourself. I think I understand what you mean. Let it sound calm, not certain, just open." He nodded, relieved, as if simply being understood had lightened something inside him. We didn't solve anything that day, but we shared a moment of truth, a rare pause in the constant flow of polite family conversation. Later, walking home, I realized that many of us carry this quiet loneliness even when surrounded by loved ones. We are together, yet we often feel unseen. We speak, yet we rarely say what truly lives inside us. And English, or any language, becomes the space where this struggle plays out. I sometimes imagine family conversations like a house with many rooms. Some rooms are bright and easy to enter laughter, shared jokes, simple updates about daily life. But other rooms are darker, filled with old memories, unspoken expectations, or buried emotions. We hesitate to open those doors, afraid of what we might find, afraid of how others might react. But when we do open them gently, something changes, not all at once, not perfectly, but slowly, like sunlight creeping across a floor. Think about your own family. Perhaps there is a room you have avoided, a topic you never discuss, a feeling you never share. What would it be like to step inside that room, not with fear, but with curiosity? You might begin with something small, something simple. Instead of saying, "I'm fine," you might say, "I've been feeling quiet lately." Repeat that softly. "I've been feeling quiet lately." Or, "I've been thinking about our last conversation." Feel how that opens space rather than closing it. I remember another night, much later, when I was visiting my parents. The house was familiar in every detail, the creak of the stairs, the smell of old books, the way the light fell across the hallway in the evening. My father and I sat in the living room after dinner, the television turned off, a rare silence between us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable, just reflective. Then he said, almost casually, "You've grown, you know." I looked at him, unsure what he meant, and he added, "Not just in your work, in how you see things." I felt something tighten in my chest, not painfully, but deeply. I realized that our relationship had shifted, not because of one big conversation, but because of many small ones over time. I replied, "I've learned a lot from you." Simple words, but honest ones. Try saying that slowly. "I've learned a lot from you." Notice how powerful gratitude can be in family conversations. He didn't say much after that, just nodded, but the room felt warmer, more open. In that moment, I understood that connection doesn't always require long speeches. Sometimes it lives in brief, sincere acknowledgments. As I reflect now, I think family conversations feel difficult because they ask us to be both brave and gentle at the same time. Brave enough to speak our truth, gentle enough to listen with care. Sometimes I feel that learning English, especially speaking, mirrors this process. At first, we are cautious, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being judged. But as we grow more comfortable, we begin to realize that imperfection is not a barrier to connection. It is part of it. Maybe you've experienced this in your own language learning, sitting in a class or in front of a screen, wanting to speak but holding back. That hesitation is familiar, and it is human. But each time you take a small risk saying one honest sentence, one vulnerable thought, you step closer to both fluency and self-expression. Let's return to a few phrases that might serve you in real life. If a family member asks, "Is everything okay?" you could respond, "I'm not sure, but I'd like to talk." Repeat after me, "I'm not sure, but I'd like to talk." Feel how that balances honesty with openness. Or if you want to reach out, you might say, "I've been missing our conversations." Try saying that slowly. "I've been missing our conversations." Let the emotion in those words be gentle, not heavy. Language gives you tools, but it is your courage that brings them to life. And family, with all its complexity, becomes both your greatest challenge and your greatest teacher. As you listen now, imagine yourself sitting with someone you love at a table. on a couch, or on a phone call late at night. Imagine choosing your words with care, not out of fear, but out of respect for both yourself and them. Remember that every difficult conversation is also an opportunity to know each other more deeply, to soften old misunderstandings, to build something more real. And even when words fail, when silence fills the space, that silence can still be meaningful. It can hold care, presence, and connection in its own quiet way. So if family conversations feel difficult, know that you are not alone in that feeling. It is part of being human, part of loving, part of growing. And with each step, each word, each breath, you are learning not only how to speak English, but how to speak from your heart. As you continue on this journey, keep noticing, keep listening, keep trying. Your voice matters, even when it trembles. Your English matters, even when it is imperfect. And your relationships matter, even when they are complex. And as I sit with all of these memories, more scenes quietly surface, like photographs slowly coming into focus. They are not dramatic moments, but they are the kind of moments that shape how we speak, how we listen, and how we understand one another. I remember one rainy Sunday, the kind of day when the world feels wrapped in gray. I was visiting my grandmother, her small house filled with the smell of tea, steamed rice, and old wooden furniture polished smooth by years of touch. She moved slowly, carefully, but with a steady warmth that made you feel safe simply being near her. We sat together at her low table, cups of tea between us. The rain tapped gently against the window, creating a soft, steady rhythm. For a long time, we didn't speak. She simply looked at me with that quiet and knowing gaze that grandmothers seem to have. Then she asked, "Are you happy?" Not casually, not as small talk, just directly, gently, sincerely. I felt my breath shift. That is such a simple question in English, but such a heavy one in life. Are you happy? Repeat that slowly. Are you happy? Notice how it lands in your chest when you say it. I didn't answer right away. I searched inside myself, trying to find words that felt true rather than polite. Finally, I said, "I think I'm learning how to be." My voice was careful, almost tender. She smiled softly, not pushing me further, not judging, just accepting my answer as it was. And in that moment, I understood that family conversations are not always about finding perfect answers. Sometimes they are about creating space where imperfect honesty is allowed to breathe. I often think about that exchange when I speak with students who feel pressure to sound good in English. They worry about grammar, about vocabulary, about sounding smart. But the heart of real communication is not perfection, it is presence. Try saying this with me. I think I'm learning. Simple, honest, human. You don't have to know everything. You just have to be willing to speak. Later that same evening, my grandmother placed her hand over mine and said, "Talking is easy, but listening, that takes a lifetime." I carried that sentence with me for years. Repeat after me. Listening takes a lifetime. Feel how that changes the way you think about conversations, especially with family. When I reflect on my own family now, I see how often misunderstandings came not from bad intentions, but from missed listening, from rushing, from assuming, from not truly being present. And I see how language, when used slowly and mindfully, can become a bridge instead of a wall. I also remember a conversation with my younger cousin, much later, when I had already become an English teacher. He was nervous about speaking, not just in English, but even with his own family. We sat outside on a warm evening, cicadas humming in the background, the air thick with the scent of jasmine. He said, "I feel like whenever I talk, I say the wrong thing." I could see the frustration in his face, the fear of being judged. I looked at him and said, "There is no wrong thing when you are speaking honestly. Try repeating that slowly. There is no wrong thing when you are speaking honestly. Let that sink in." We practiced together, not grammar drills, but simple, real sentences. "I feel tired today. I miss you. I don't know how to explain this, but I'll try." Each sentence was small, but each carried a piece of his inner world. In many ways, that is what family conversations ask of us, not perfect language, but brave language. Sometimes I feel that we treat family like something permanent, something that will always be there, and so we postpone the important words. We think, "I'll tell them later," but later is not guaranteed. I remember realizing this clearly one afternoon when I was cleaning out old boxes in my room. I found a stack of letters my mother had written to me when I was younger, short notes left in my lunchbox, little reminders of love, encouragement, everyday care. One line struck me deeply: "Even if we don't talk much today, remember that I am here." I felt tears form, not from sadness, but from a quiet appreciation of how much had been communicated between us beyond words. Try saying that softly: "I am here." 2 simple words, but in family conversations, they can mean everything. And maybe that is what makes family conversations both difficult and beautiful. They are filled with what is said and what is left unsaid, with words and with silences, with closeness and distance intertwined. As you continue listening, I invite you to notice your own patterns. When do you speak easily? When do you hold back? What do you wish you could say, but haven't yet found the courage to express? In English, you don't need complicated sentences to begin. You can start with something like, "Can we talk for a moment?" Repeat after me. "Can we talk for a moment?" Feel how respectful that sounds. Or, "I want to understand you better." Try saying that slowly. "I want to understand you better." That is not just a sentence, it is an intention. I think, more and more, that family conversations are not something we master. They are something we practice, again and again, with patience, humility, and care. Sometimes I feel grateful for all the difficult conversations I've had, because they have taught me how to listen, how to slow down, how to choose my words with intention. They have shaped not only my English, but my way of being in the world. And as you walk your own path with your family, with your language, with your inner life, remember that every small step matters. Every honest word, every gentle silence, every attempt to connect is part of your growth. You are not just learning English. You are learning how to relate, how to feel, how to be present with others and with yourself. And that is a lifelong journey. So when family conversations feel difficult, and they will see them not as failures, but as invitations to slow down, to listen, to speak with care, to love more consciously. And if at times you stumble, if your words feel clumsy, if your heart feels unsure, that is okay. You are learning, you are trying, you are becoming. And before we close, I want you to return, just once more, to the feeling beneath everything we have spoken about. Think of your family not as roles, not as expectations, not as histories or obligations, but simply as people you share time with in this life. People who have seen you at your best and at your most vulnerable. People who shaped your first words, your first silences, your first ways of loving. I sometimes imagine conversations with family as a long road that never really ends. Sometimes it is smooth, easy to walk, filled with light. Sometimes it is uneven, confusing, full of turns you did not expect. But every step, even the difficult ones, moves you forward. There will be mornings when you sit at a table with someone you love and say very little, yet feel deeply understood. There will be phone calls where you speak for hours and still feel something was left unsaid. There will be moments when English feels too small for what you carry in your heart, and moments when a single, simple sentence feels exactly right. If there is one thing I hope you carry with you from this episode, it is this: difficulty does not mean failure. In family, in language, in life, difficulty often means depth. When you feel that tension before speaking, let it be a reminder to slow down. When you feel afraid of being misunderstood, let it be an invitation to speak gently. When you feel distant from someone you love, let it be a reason to reach out, even in the smallest way. Maybe next time you begin a family conversation, you will notice your breath first. Maybe you will choose your words with a little more care. Maybe you will allow silence to be part of the conversation instead of something to escape from. And as you continue learning English, remember that every real conversation, especially the difficult ones, is part of your growth. You are not just collecting vocabulary. You are shaping your voice, your presence, your way of connecting with others. You do not need to have everything figured out. You only need to stay open, to keep trying, to keep listening, to keep speaking from a place of honesty. So wherever you are right now, sitting, walking, lying down, or moving through your day, take one slow breath with me. Feel the ground beneath you. Feel your own voice inside you, waiting to be expressed. Your words matter. Your feelings matter. Your connections matter. This is English with Thomas. I'm Thomas. Keep speaking, keep growing, and keep trusting yourself.